When my cousin told me there wasn't enough space for me at our annual family reunion, I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for inclusion. Instead, I opened my laptop, found the park they had reserved for 60 people, and bought the entire facility for the day. What happened next changed our family forever. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the best response to being left out isn't finding another table. It's building a bigger one. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Thompson, and I've always been the family member who didn't quite fit the mold. While my relatives gathered around kitchen tables discussing mortgage rates and school district rankings, I was building something they couldn't quite understand. A technology consulting firm that started in my cramped studio apartment and grew into something that would eventually employ 42 people across 3 cities. But success, I learned, doesn't automatically translate to acceptance, especially when your version of achievement looks different from everyone else's expectations. The notification buzzed on my phone during a client presentation in downtown Chicago. Our conference room overlooked the bustling streets below, and I was in the middle of explaining cloud infrastructure optimization to a team of executives when my personal phone lit up with what seemed like celebration. The Thompson family reunion. Group chat was exploding with activity, and even from across the room, I could see the excitement building with every message that appeared on my screen. After wrapping up the presentation and securing what would become a 6-figure contract, I finally checked my phone. The messages painted a picture of coordinated enthusiasm that had become familiar over the years. My cousin Brittany had taken charge again, orchestrating every detail of our annual gathering with the precision of a military operation. Photos of matching t-shirts filled the chat, followed by detailed food assignment lists, activity schedules, and reminders about bringing folding chairs and sunscreen. Our family reunion had become something of a tradition over the past decade, growing from a simple picnic with my grandparents to an elaborate celebration that brought together relatives from across the Midwest. Every August, we descended upon Riverside Park in Minneapolis, transforming the public space into our own private celebration of Thompson family bonds and shared memories. The event had evolved into something that required months of planning, careful coordination, and increasingly detailed logistics as our family continued to expand. Brittany had always positioned herself as the natural leader of these gatherings. She possessed an organizational mind that thrived on creating structure and ensuring everyone knew their designated role in the family hierarchy. Her messages were always thorough, leaving no detail unaddressed and no question unanswered. She had married her high school sweetheart, moved into a spacious suburban home with a perfect lawn, and produced 2 well-behaved children who played soccer and took piano lessons. In many ways, she embodied everything our extended family viewed as successful and admirable. My brother Kevin served as her reliable second-in-command, bringing his accountant's attention to detail to budget planning and cost coordination. He had followed a similarly traditional path, establishing himself in a respected profession, marrying a woman our parents adored, and settling into the kind of stable, predictable lifestyle that earned consistent approval at holiday dinners. Together, Brittany and Kevin formed the nucleus around which our family gatherings revolved, and their leadership had never been questioned or challenged. As I scrolled through the accumulated messages, I began to notice something peculiar. Every aspect of the reunion had been meticulously planned and documented. Food assignments were distributed among various aunts and uncles, with detailed instructions about quantities and dietary restrictions. Activity coordinators had been appointed for different age groups, ensuring entertainment for everyone from toddlers to great-grandparents. Even parking arrangements had been discussed and assigned based on arrival times and family size. But my name appeared nowhere in these detailed plans. No food assignment, no activity coordination, no mention of my usual contribution or expected participation. The oversight seemed so complete that I initially assumed I had missed earlier messages or failed to respond to some preliminary planning conversation. I scrolled back through weeks of chat history, searching for the moment when assignments had been distributed and roles had been established. The search yielded nothing. While every other family member had received specific instructions and expectations, I remained completely absent from the organizational framework that Brittany had constructed. The omission felt deliberate in its thoroughness, too systematic to be accidental. I had attended every single reunion since the tradition began, contributing both financially and logistically to its success. Yet somehow I had been entirely overlooked in this year's planning process. Rather than making assumptions or jumping to conclusions, I decided to address the situation directly. I composed a straightforward message to Brittany, asking about my role in this year's event and inquiring about accommodation arrangements at the nearby campground where family members typically stayed during reunion weekend. My tone was casual and friendly, assuming that some simple miscommunication had occurred and could be easily resolved with a quick clarification. Her response arrived 23 minutes later, and its contents hit me with the force of unexpected betrayal. The message was brief and matter-of-fact, delivered with the kind of casual indifference that somehow made it more painful than outright hostility would have been. She explained that difficult decisions had been necessary this year due to new capacity restrictions at the park pavilion. Families with children had been prioritized, and space limitations had required some tough choices about attendance. The suggestion that followed felt like a knife twist disguised as consideration. Perhaps I could stop by for an hour or two on Saturday afternoon, she wrote, as if I were a distant acquaintance rather than a family member who had never missed a single gathering. The casual dismissal was wrapped in language that made it sound reasonable, even thoughtful, as though they were doing me a favor by offering this limited participation option. I set my phone down and stared out at the Chicago skyline, trying to process what had just happened. The mathematical reality of the situation began to crystallize in my mind as I considered the family members who had been included versus those who had been excluded. The park pavilion had a capacity of 60 people, a number I knew well from years of helping coordinate these gatherings. When I mentally tallied the families that Brittany had invited, the count came to exactly 58 people. They had found room for everyone except me. In a space that could accommodate 60 people, they had somehow determined that 58 was the absolute maximum, and that the missing 2 spaces couldn't possibly include the single woman who lived in Chicago and worked in technology. The precision of this exclusion made it impossible to dismiss as an oversight or innocent mistake. The realization triggered a flood of memories that I had spent years trying to rationalize or minimize. This pattern of exclusion had deep roots in our family dynamic, extending far beyond reunion planning into virtually every significant family event and milestone celebration. At Kevin's wedding 5 years earlier, I had been seated at what the wedding planner had euphemistically called the friends and extended family table, despite being the groom's sister. The table placement had positioned me with college friends and distant relatives rather than immediate family, a symbolic statement about my perceived importance in Kevin's life. During holiday celebrations, similar patterns emerged with consistent regularity. Family photos would be organized and coordinated, with multiple generations carefully arranged for posterity. Yet somehow I would be in the bathroom or taking a phone call when the camera came out. Christmas gift exchanges would be elaborately planned with detailed lists and spending limits, but my contributions would be acknowledged with polite thanks before conversation quickly moved to more interesting presents from other family members. The cumulative effect of these experiences had created a narrative about my place in the family structure that everyone seemed to accept without question. I was the independent one, the career-focused one, the one who had chosen professional success over traditional family priorities. This characterization allowed everyone to feel comfortable with my exclusion because it suggested that I preferred it that way, that I was too busy or too different to really want full inclusion in family activities. My mother had contributed, to this narrative in subtle but significant ways over the years. During phone conversations, she would describe family gatherings I hadn't been invited to with casual mentions that revealed the depth of my exclusion. "Oh, we had such a nice time at Sunday dinner last week," she might say, before listing the relatives who had attended a gathering I hadn't known was happening. When I expressed surprise or hurt about being left out, she would offer explanations that somehow made my exclusion seem reasonable or even considerate. "We know how busy you are with work," became her standard response to my questions about missed invitations. "We didn't want to burden you with another family obligation when you have so much on your plate." The language of consideration masked what felt like indifference, and over time, I had learned to accept these explanations rather than challenge them directly. The professional success that should have been a source of family pride had somehow become a barrier to inclusion instead. My consulting firm had grown from a one-person operation to a multi-city company that served Fortune 500 clients. But this achievement was consistently minimized or misunderstood by family members who couldn't relate to my work or its significance. At family dinners, while Kevin discussed his latest promotion at the accounting firm and Brittany shared updates about her husband's construction projects, my business developments were met with polite nods and quick topic changes. "That's nice," "Dear," had become my mother's standard response to news about major client acquisitions or business expansion. The phrase carried undertones of dismissal that suggested my achievements were interesting, but not particularly important or relevant to the family's shared concerns. When I mentioned hiring new employees or opening satellite offices, the response was similarly lukewarm, lacking the enthusiasm and pride that greeted Kevin's professional milestones or Brittany's domestic accomplishments. This consistent pattern of minimization had created a complex relationship between my professional identity and my family connections. The success I had worked so hard to achieve seemed to push me further away from the people I most wanted to impress and include. The more my business grew, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The more I seemed to drift from the family center, as though achievement and belonging were somehow mutually exclusive in the Thompson family dynamic. The evening after receiving Brittany's message, I called my mother to discuss the reunion situation directly. Our conversation began with pleasant small talk about her garden and my father's recent retirement, but eventually, I steered the discussion toward the family gathering and my apparent exclusion from the planning process. My mother's response revealed the depth of the assumptions that had been made about my desires and priorities, without anyone actually consulting me about them. "Well, honey, you know how Brittany gets about managing all these details," she said, her tone suggesting that I should understand and accept the complexity of coordinating such a large family gathering. "She's trying to juggle so many people and so many different needs. It's not easy to make everyone happy." The explanation positioned Brittany as the overwhelmed organizer, rather than addressing the fundamental question of why I had been excluded from consideration entirely. When I pressed the issue more directly, pointing out that I had been completely left out of a family event I had never missed, my mother's response cut deeper than Brittany's casual dismissal had. "It's not that you're excluded, sweetie," she said, using the kind of gentle tone reserved for explaining difficult concepts to children. "You can still visit for a few hours. Besides, you're always so busy with your work commitments. We weren't really sure you'd want to spend an entire weekend at a family gathering when you could be focusing on your business or enjoying some personal time." The assumption embedded in her response revealed everything I needed to know about how my family perceived me and my priorities. They had decided, without consultation or conversation, that I would prefer professional obligations or solitude over family time. They had constructed a narrative about my character and desires that justified their decision to exclude me, and they had done so with such confidence that they seemed genuinely surprised by my disappointment and confusion. "I've never missed a family reunion, Mom," I reminded her, hoping to break through the assumptions with simple factual evidence. I've attended every single gathering since we started this tradition. I've contributed food, helped with setup, participated in all the activities, and stayed for the entire weekend every single year. When have I ever given you the impression that I didn't want to be there? The silence that followed my question spoke volumes about the disconnect between my family's perceptions and my actual behavior and expressed preferences. My mother seemed genuinely surprised by my perspective, as though she had never considered that my consistent attendance and participation might indicate a genuine desire to be included, rather than a sense of obligation or social necessity. "I suppose you're right," she said finally, her tone suggesting that she was reconsidering assumptions she had never previously questioned. "I just thought that maybe this year you might appreciate a break from family obligations. You work so hard, and you seem to have so much going on in your life. Maybe you could use the weekend to relax and focus on yourself instead of dealing with all the chaos that comes with family gatherings." The suggestion that family time constituted a burden rather than a pleasure revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had driven my exclusion. My mother genuinely believed that she was being considerate by relieving me of family obligations, never recognizing that these gatherings represented connection and belonging rather than duty and stress. The disconnect was so complete that she seemed unable to understand why I would be hurt by exclusion rather than grateful for freedom from family responsibilities. After ending the phone call, I sat in my downtown loft overlooking the Chicago River and tried to process the full implications of what had happened. The exclusion from the reunion was painful enough, but the deeper realization was more troubling. My family had developed a complete narrative about who I was and what I wanted, without ever actually asking me about my feelings or preferences. They had decided that my professional success made me too busy for family, that my urban lifestyle made me too different to fit in, and that my independence made me less needful of family connection than other relatives. This narrative had become so entrenched that it now influenced every family decision that involved me. I wasn't excluded out of malice or deliberate cruelty, but rather out of assumptions that had hardened into accepted facts. My family genuinely believed they were being considerate by leaving me out, never recognizing that their consideration felt like rejection and their assumptions felt like dismissal. The most painful aspect of this realization was understanding how my own behavior might have contributed to these misconceptions. In an effort to appear strong and independent, I had rarely expressed vulnerability or need for family connection. When excluded from events, I had accepted explanations graciously rather than challenging them directly. When my achievements were minimized, I had smiled and changed the subject rather than insisting on recognition or understanding. My response to years of subtle exclusion had been to prove that I didn't need their approval or inclusion. But this strategy had backfired. In the most fundamental way, by demonstrating my independence and success, I had inadvertently validated their belief that I was different from other family members and less interested in traditional family bonds. My strength had been interpreted as distance, and my achievements had been seen as evidence that I had outgrown the need for family connection. Sitting alone in my beautiful loft apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my professional success but separated from the family relationships I had always valued, I realized that something fundamental had to change. I could continue accepting their narrative about who I was and what I wanted, or I could find a way to show them who I really was and what family actually meant to me. The decision crystallized slowly as I considered my options and resources. For years, I had tried to earn inclusion through accommodation and understanding, accepting their explanations and working around their assumptions. But accommodation had only reinforced their misconceptions, and understanding had been consistently one-sided. Perhaps it was time for a different approach, one that would demonstrate my values and priorities in ways that couldn't be misunderstood or dismissed. I opened my laptop and began researching Riverside Park, the venue where my family had planned their carefully coordinated gathering for 60 people in a space that could accommodate everyone except me. What I discovered would change not only the reunion, but our entire family dynamic in ways that none of us could have anticipated. The research I conducted that evening opened my eyes to possibilities I had never considered before. Riverside Park wasn't simply a municipal facility managed by the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Department, as I had always assumed. 3 years earlier, the city had entered into a public-private partnership that had transformed portions of the park into a premium event destination. The renovation had been extensive, adding amenities and services that elevated the venue far beyond typical public park offerings. Riverside Entertainment Group had taken over management of the enhanced facilities, offering everything from basic pavilion rentals to elaborate corporate retreats and wedding celebrations. Their website showcased testimonials from Fortune 500 companies that had hosted executive retreats at the park, complete with professional catering, audio-visual equipment, and dedicated event coordination staff. The transformation had been so comprehensive that many Twin Cities residents weren't even aware of the premium services now available at what had once been a simple public park. As I explored their service offerings, I discovered packages that ranged from modest enhancements to complete event takeovers. The basic pavilion rental that my family had secured was at the bottom tier of available options, providing little more than a covered space and access to public restrooms. But the premium packages offered amenities that could transform a simple family gathering into something truly extraordinary. The Signature Experience package included professional catering, coordination, allowing clients to work with some of Minneapolis's most renowned restaurants and chefs. The Enhanced Entertainment option provided live music, professional photography, and activity coordination for groups of all ages. The Executive Retreat package offered audiovisual equipment, presentation facilities, and even corporate team building, activities that could be adapted for family use. But it was the final option that captured my attention and sparked the plan that would change everything. At the bottom of their premium services page, almost hidden among the standard offerings, was a single line that made my heart race with possibility. For truly exclusive events, inquire about our private park experience. Complete venue buyout, available for special occasions. The concept was breathtaking in its simplicity and audacious in its scope. Rather than sharing the park with other visitors and events, clients could arrange for exclusive access to the entire facility for their gathering. This meant private use of all pavilions, unrestricted access to the lake and recreational areas, dedicated parking, and the ability to customize every aspect of the experience without concern for other park users or scheduled activities. I clicked through to the contact information and found myself staring at a phone number that could potentially solve every problem my family had created. The capacity limitations that had been used to justify my exclusion would become irrelevant if the entire park were available for our use. The crowded conditions that had supposedly made it impossible to include everyone would disappear if we had unlimited space and facilities. The financial investment would be significant, but as I calculated the potential cost against my company's recent quarterly earnings, I realized that this grand gesture was well within my means. The consulting firm had been experiencing unprecedented growth, with new contracts and expansion opportunities creating revenue streams that exceeded my most optimistic projections. What had once seemed like an impossible luxury was now simply another business decision, albeit one with deeply personal motivations. I picked up my phone and dialed the number before I could second-guess the impulse. The call was answered on the second ring by a professional female voice that immediately conveyed competence and enthusiasm. Riverside Entertainment Group. This is Amanda speaking. How can I help you create an unforgettable experience today? Her greeting was polished and welcoming, suggesting that unusual requests were part of her daily routine. I took a deep breath and launched into an explanation that would have seemed absurd just hours earlier. Hello, Amanda. I'm calling to inquire about your private park experience option. I'm interested in arranging a complete venue buyout for a family reunion on August 15th. There was a brief pause, and I could hear the soft clicking of computer keys as she accessed her scheduling system. A complete park buyout is certainly possible, she replied, her tone professional but curious. That's quite an exclusive experience. Can you tell me more about the size and scope of your event? We're planning a family reunion for approximately 60 to 70 people, but I want to ensure we have plenty of space and complete privacy for the gathering. I'd like to explore all the premium options you offer, including catering, entertainment, and any special services that might enhance the experience. The clicking of keys continued as Amanda pulled up information about availability and pricing. Let me check our calendar for August 15th. Yes, that date is available for a complete park buyout. The investment for exclusive access to the entire facility would be $45,000 for the day, which includes private use of all pavilions, the lake area, recreational facilities, dedicated parking, and basic event coordination services. The number was substantial, but not shocking given the scope of what was being offered. I had paid similar amounts for corporate events and client entertainment, and the impact this would have on my family situation was worth far more than the financial cost. That sounds reasonable, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the excitement building in my chest. What additional services are available to enhance the experience? Amanda's enthusiasm became more evident as she described the full range of options. We can coordinate premium catering with some of Minneapolis's finest restaurants, arrange for live entertainment, including bands or acoustic performers, provide professional photography and videography services, organize activities for all age groups, and even arrange for specialty services like food trucks, dessert stations, or custom decorations. Each option she described added layers of possibility to what was already shaping up to be an extraordinary event. I found myself imagining the looks on my family's faces when they discovered that their modest picnic had been transformed into something that resembled a high-end corporate retreat or wedding celebration. I'd like to include all of those options, I said, my decision solidifying with each word. Premium catering, live entertainment, professional photography, activities for multiple age groups, and any specialty services that would make this truly memorable. The scope of what I was requesting seemed to energize Amanda even further. This sounds like it's going to be an incredible celebration, she said, and I could hear the genuine excitement in her voice. With all the premium services you've mentioned, we're looking at a total investment of approximately $60,000 to $65,000, depending on specific catering choices and entertainment options. The figure represented roughly 2 months of revenue for my consulting firm, a significant expense, but one that would create an experience unlike anything my family had ever witnessed. More importantly, it would demonstrate capabilities and resources that they had never understood or acknowledged. Let's proceed, I said, feeling a surge of determination that surprised me with its intensity. I'd like to reserve the date and begin planning immediately. Amanda guided me through the initial booking process, collecting basic information and explaining the detailed planning phase that would follow. She assured me that their event coordination team would handle every aspect of the celebration, from initial vendor selection to day of logistics, ensuring that I could focus on enjoying the reunion rather than managing the countless details involved in such an elaborate event. After completing the booking and providing a deposit to secure the date, I hung up the phone and sat in my quiet loft, processing what I had just committed to. In the span of a single phone call, I had transformed what was supposed to be my exclusion from a family gathering into the foundation for an event that would exceed everyone's expectations and possibly reshape our family dynamics permanently. The planning process that followed consumed the next 2 weeks of my life outside of work hours. Amanda proved to be an exceptional event coordinator, presenting options and recommendations that elevated every aspect of the reunion beyond anything I could have imagined on my own. She connected me with vendors who specialized in family-friendly entertainment, caterers who could accommodate multiple generations of taste preferences, and activity coordinators who understood how to engage everyone from toddlers to great-grandparents. The catering selection process alone involved tasting sessions with 3 different restaurants, each offering approaches that ranged from elevated comfort food to gourmet outdoor dining experiences. I ultimately chose a barbecue specialist who had earned recognition from Minneapolis food critics for their innovative approaches to traditional outdoor cooking. Their menu featured premium cuts of meat, artisanal side dishes, and dessert options that would satisfy sophisticated palates while remaining accessible to family members with simpler preferences. The entertainment coordination proved equally engaging. Amanda arranged for me to interview several acoustic performers and small bands whose styles would complement a family gathering without overwhelming conversation and connection. I selected a trio that specialized in multi-generational music, capable of performing everything from classic country and folk songs that would appeal to my parents' generation to contemporary acoustic arrangements that would engage younger family members. The photography services required careful consideration of family dynamics and the need to capture both candid moments and formal group portraits. I selected a photographer whose portfolio demonstrated expertise in large family gatherings, someone who understood how to coordinate multiple generations while maintaining a relaxed, natural atmosphere that would encourage genuine interactions rather than stiff, posed shots. Activity planning presented the most complex logistical challenge, as I wanted to ensure engagement for family members ranging from young children to elderly relatives with mobility limitations. Amanda connected me with specialists who designed inclusive activities that could accommodate different physical abilities and interests, while encouraging intergenerational interaction. The final activity plan included traditional lawn games with modern twists, fishing tournaments with multiple skill levels, craft stations for creative family members, and quiet conversation areas for those who preferred more intimate interactions. Throughout this planning process, I found myself thinking not just about the immediate impact of the reunion, but about the larger message I wanted to convey to my family. This event would demonstrate that I understood their values around family, connection, and celebration, but it would also show them capabilities and resources they had never recognized or appreciated. The gathering would prove that my professional success wasn't separate from my family priorities, but rather enabled me to contribute to family experiences in ways that had never been possible before. The most challenging aspect of the planning involved guest list considerations. Brittany's original reunion had been limited to 60 people due to supposed space constraints, but with the entire park at our disposal, I had the opportunity to expand the gathering significantly. I spent hours researching our extended family tree, identifying relatives who had been excluded from recent gatherings due to geographic distance, financial constraints, or family politics that I had never fully understood. Great Aunt Marjorie had been deemed too frail for family gatherings in recent years, despite her expressed desire to attend and her clear mental acuity. I arranged for medical transport services that would ensure her safe participation while providing any assistance she might need during the event. The cost was minimal compared to the overall event budget, but the symbolic importance of including her felt enormous. Cousin David and his family had been gradually excluded from reunions due to their relocation to Denver and the financial burden of traveling to Minneapolis for weekend gatherings. I contacted him directly, offering to arrange and cover all travel expenses for his family's participation. His emotional response to the invitation revealed how much these exclusions had affected family members who had been written off as too difficult or expensive to include. Uncle Frank had missed recent gatherings due to his weekend work schedule, which required him to be available for emergency calls related to his plumbing business. I arranged for backup coverage through a professional service, ensuring that he could attend without risking income or client relationships. Again, the cost was minimal, but the impact on his ability to participate was transformative. As I compiled the expanded guest list, I realized that the Thompson family was much larger and more diverse than the carefully curated group that had been attending recent reunions. Geographic distance, financial constraints, work obligations, and health limitations had gradually reduced our gatherings to a core group that excluded many relatives who would have valued the opportunity to reconnect with extended family. The final guest list included 87 family members spanning 4 generations and representing locations from coast to coast. Some hadn't attended a Thompson family gathering in over a decade, while others had never been invited to participate in our annual celebrations. The logistics of coordinating travel and accommodation for such a large group were complex, but Amanda's team handled these details with professional efficiency that impressed me with its thoroughness. Invitation design became another opportunity to communicate the elevated nature of this gathering. Rather than the casual text messages or phone calls that typically announced our reunions, I commissioned custom invitations that reflected both the significance of the occasion and the quality of experience that awaited recipients. The invitations were printed on heavy cardstock with elegant typography and included detailed information about travel arrangements, accommodation options, and the comprehensive nature of the celebration. The invitation text emphasized that all expenses would be covered and that recipients needed only to bring themselves and their families to enjoy a weekend of connection and celebration. This approach eliminated the financial barriers that had prevented some family members from participating in previous gatherings, while also signaling that this event would be fundamentally different from anything we had experienced before. Mailing these invitations felt like launching a campaign that would reshape our family's understanding of what was possible when resources were applied thoughtfully to strengthen relationships and create shared experiences. Each envelope contained not just an invitation to a party, but an opportunity to reconnect with extended family and participate in something that honored our collective history while pointing toward a more inclusive future. The response to the invitations exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Phone calls and emails poured in from relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years, expressing gratitude for the inclusion and excitement about reconnecting with family members they hadn't seen in decades. Great Aunt Marjorie called personally to thank me for arranging transportation and to share stories about Thompson family gatherings from her childhood that I had never heard before. Cousin David's response was particularly moving. He sent a lengthy email describing how excluded his family had felt from recent gatherings and how much this invitation meant to his children, who had begun to think that geographic distance had permanently separated them from their extended family. His gratitude was profound, but it also highlighted how many family members had been quietly hurt by exclusions they had accepted as inevitable rather than challenging as unnecessary. The planning process consumed not just time and energy, but also emotional bandwidth as I grappled with the implications of what I was creating. This reunion would be more than just a response to my own exclusion. It would serve as a statement about values, priorities, and the kind of family culture I wanted to help create. The financial investment was significant, but the potential return in terms of relationships and family cohesion felt immeasurable. As August 15th approached, I found myself experiencing a complex mixture of excitement and nervousness about how the event would unfold. The planning had been meticulous, with every detail considered and every contingency addressed. But the human dynamics of bringing together 87 family members with varying expectations and potentially conflicting personalities remained unpredictable. The most challenging aspect of the final preparations involved managing my own expectations and emotional investment in the outcome. Part of me hoped that this gesture would transform family relationships and create new foundations for inclusion and understanding. But another part of me recognized that grand gestures don't automatically solve complex interpersonal dynamics, and that some family members might resist or resent the disruption of established patterns. Regardless of the ultimate outcome, I knew I had created something meaningful and important. The reunion would demonstrate values I held dear about family inclusion, resource sharing, and the importance of bringing people together rather than finding reasons to leave them out. Whether or not my family appreciated or understood these values, I would know that I had acted in accordance with my own principles and priorities. The night before the reunion, I sat in my loft reviewing the final coordination details with Amanda and her team. Every aspect of the event had been planned and confirmed, from the arrival schedule for out-of-town relatives to the timeline for food service and entertainment. The transformation of Riverside Park would begin at sunrise, with vendors and staff, arriving to create an experience that none of us would ever forget. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. What had begun as exclusion and disappointment had evolved into an opportunity to demonstrate love, capability, and commitment in ways that transcended traditional family dynamics. Tomorrow would reveal whether my family was ready to embrace a different vision of what we could be together, or whether some relationships were too entrenched in limiting patterns to accommodate growth and change. Either way, I would wake up knowing that I had refused to accept exclusion as inevitable and had instead chosen to create inclusion on a scale that honored every family member who wanted to participate. The Thompson family reunion would never be the same, and neither would I. The morning of August 15th arrived with the kind of perfect weather that event planners dream about but can never guarantee. Clear skies stretched endlessly above Minneapolis, with temperatures that promised to remain comfortable throughout the day, and a gentle breeze that would keep everyone refreshed without disrupting outdoor activities. As I drove toward Riverside Park in my Tesla Model S, I felt a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy that reminded me of major client presentations, but with far more personal stakes attached to the outcome. I arrived at the park at 7:30 in the morning, 90 minutes before any family members were scheduled to appear. The transformation was already underway, with Amanda's team coordinating a complex dance of vendors, decorators, and service providers who were converting the familiar public space into something that resembled a high-end outdoor wedding venue. The efficiency and professionalism of the operation impressed me, even though I had been involved in planning every detail. The catering team had arrived first, establishing preparation areas and beginning the complex process of cooking for nearly 90 people while maintaining the quality standards that had made their restaurant a Minneapolis favorite. The smoky aroma of premium barbecue was already beginning to waft across the park, creating an atmosphere that immediately elevated the gathering beyond typical picnic fare. Tables were being arranged under the main pavilion, each one covered with crisp white linens and featuring centerpieces that incorporated wildflowers native to Minnesota. The entertainment setup was equally impressive, with the acoustic trio conducting sound checks while their equipment was arranged to provide music throughout the park without overwhelming conversation areas. They had brought professional-grade instruments and sound systems that would ensure every family member could enjoy the music regardless of their location within the venue. Their repertoire had been carefully selected to span multiple decades and musical styles, ensuring that every generation would hear familiar songs during the celebration. Amanda coordinated the various teams with the kind of calm efficiency that comes from years of experience managing complex events. She moved between vendor stations, checking on progress and making minor adjustments to ensure that everything would be perfect when the first guests arrived. Her attention to detail was remarkable, extending to elements I would never have considered, such as the placement of waste receptacles to maintain the venue's aesthetic appeal and the positioning of seating areas to encourage natural conversation groupings. The photography team was capturing the transformation process, documenting the preparation that would precede the family gathering. These behind-the-scenes images would become part of the permanent record of the event, showing the care and planning that had gone into creating this experience. The lead photographer moved through the space with an artist's eye, finding angles and compositions that would showcase the beauty of the park and the elegance of the setup. Activity stations were being established throughout the park, each one designed to engage different age groups and interests. The fishing tournament area featured premium equipment and seating that would accommodate elderly family members who wanted to participate without physical strain. Lawn games had been arranged with professional quality equipment that would last throughout the day and provide consistent entertainment for competitive family members. Craft stations included supplies for multiple projects, ensuring that children and adults could create personalized mementos of the gathering. As the setup continued, I found myself walking through the transformed space and marveling at what had been accomplished in just 2 weeks of planning. The park retained its natural beauty and familiar layout, but every aspect had been enhanced to create an experience that honored both the location and the occasion. This wasn't an attempt to impose something foreign on a beloved family venue, but rather an effort to reveal the full potential of a space that had always held special meaning for our family. At 8:45, I positioned myself near the main entrance to welcome arriving family members. The first car to arrive was unfamiliar to me, bearing Colorado license plates that immediately identified its occupants as David's family from Denver. I had arranged for their flights and ground transportation, but seeing them actually arrive filled me with an emotion I hadn't anticipated. These were family members who had been gradually excluded from our gatherings, and their presence represented the beginning of the inclusive celebration I had envisioned. David emerged from the rental car looking around with obvious amazement at the transformed park. His wife Sarah and their 3 children followed, all of them clearly impressed by the scale and elegance of what they were seeing. The children ran toward the activity areas with excitement, while David and Sarah approached me with expressions that mixed gratitude and bewilderment. "Jessica, this is incredible," David said, embracing me warmly. "I can't believe you arranged all of this. When we got your invitation, we thought it might be a nice family gathering, but this is beyond anything we could have imagined." Sarah nodded enthusiastically, tears forming in her eyes as she spoke. The kids have been talking about nothing else for weeks. They were so excited to meet their cousins and see family they'd only heard about in stories. "Thank you for making this possible for us." Their gratitude was deeply moving, but it also highlighted how much family connection had been lost through years of exclusions based on distance and logistics. David's family had been written off as too far away to include regularly, but their presence at the reunion demonstrated that geographic separation didn't have to mean emotional disconnection if resources were applied thoughtfully to bridge the gap. Great Aunt Marjorie arrived in the medical transport vehicle I had arranged, accompanied by a nurse who would remain available throughout the day to provide any assistance she might need. At 93, she was the oldest member of our extended family and the keeper of Thompson family history that stretched back to the early 20th century. Her presence at the reunion represented a living link to family stories and traditions that risked being lost if we didn't create opportunities for intergenerational connection. As the nurse helped her from the vehicle, Marjorie's face lit up with joy at seeing the park transformed for our celebration. She had attended Thompson family gatherings for over 7 decades, and her perspective on what we were creating carried weight that extended far beyond the immediate event. Her participation validated the importance of family connection across generations and demonstrated that age and physical limitations didn't have to prevent meaningful involvement in family celebrations. "Oh my goodness, Jessica," she said as I approached to welcome her. "This is absolutely beautiful. I haven't seen the family come together like this since your great-grandfather's 90th birthday celebration back in 1985. He would be so proud to see what you've created here today." Her reference to family history I had never heard before reminded me of how much knowledge and perspective existed within our extended family, but was rarely shared because we lacked opportunities for deep conversation and connection. The reunion I had planned would provide space and time for these stories to emerge, creating opportunities for younger family members to learn about their heritage while honoring the experiences of older relatives. More cars began arriving in rapid succession, each one bringing family members who represented different aspects of our shared history and diverse present circumstances. Uncle Frank arrived in his work truck, having arranged coverage for his plumbing business that would allow him to attend without financial penalty. Cousin Lisa brought her teenage daughters, who had never attended a Thompson family gathering because previous events had conflicted with their school and sports schedules. The variety of vehicles in the parking lot told the story of our family's economic diversity, from David's rental car to Frank's work truck to several modest sedans that belonged to family members living on fixed incomes. This diversity had sometimes created subtle tensions at previous gatherings, where differences in financial circumstances could become uncomfortable undercurrents. But today, with all expenses covered and activities designed to include everyone regardless of economic status, these differences felt like interesting variations rather than divisive factors. As more family members arrived and began exploring the transformed park, I watched their reactions with fascination. Some immediately gravitated toward the food areas, drawn by the amazing aromas and impressive presentation. Others headed straight for the activity stations, eager to engage in games and competitions. Many simply stood and absorbed the scale and elegance of what they were experiencing, clearly processing the disconnect between their expectations and the reality of what had been created. The conversations I overheard reflected this processing, with family members sharing their amazement and trying to understand how such an elaborate event had come together. Some knew about my consulting business but had never understood its scale or success well enough to imagine that I could single-handedly fund and coordinate something of this magnitude. Others were learning for the first time about my professional accomplishments and the resources they had generated. I had no idea. "Jessica's business was doing so well," I heard one cousin say to another. "I mean, I knew she worked with computers or something, but I never imagined she was successful enough to do something like this." These conversations revealed how little my extended family understood about my professional life and achievements. The narrative about my career being a hobby or side interest had been so pervasive that even relatives who saw me regularly at family events had no accurate understanding of what I had built or accomplished. The reunion was serving as an education about my capabilities and resources, as much as it was a celebration of family connection. The acoustic trio began their first set as more family members continued to arrive, filling the park with music that immediately elevated the atmosphere beyond typical family gathering dynamics. Their song selection was perfect, opening with folk classics that appealed to older family members while seamlessly transitioning to contemporary acoustic arrangements that engaged younger relatives. The professional quality of their performance transformed casual background music into genuine entertainment that enhanced every aspect of the celebration. Photography began in earnest as the photographer moved through the crowd, capturing candid moments of connection and joy. Unlike typical family gatherings where someone with a phone tried to coordinate group shots, this professional documentation would create lasting memories that honored both individual personalities and group dynamics. The photographer's skill in working with large families was evident in her ability to capture natural expressions and genuine interactions rather than forced poses. The catering team began serving the first course as family members gathered around the elegantly appointed tables. The presentation was restaurant quality, with attention to detail that elevated traditional barbecue into something that felt gourmet without losing the comfort food appeal that made it perfect for family celebration. Side dishes included sophisticated versions of picnic classics, while dessert options ranged from artisanal ice cream to custom cakes that incorporated Thompson family history into their decorative elements. As I moved through the crowd, greeting family members and ensuring everyone felt welcome, I began to notice the emergence of conversations and connections that hadn't happened at previous gatherings. The expanded guest list had brought together relatives who hadn't seen each other in years, creating opportunities for relationship renewal and the sharing of life updates that had been impossible when our gatherings were limited to smaller, more familiar groups. Great Aunt Marjorie had become the center of a storytelling circle, sharing memories of Thompson family history that fascinated younger relatives who had never heard these stories before. Her presence had created an intergenerational bridge that was allowing family knowledge and traditions to be passed down in ways that wouldn't have been possible if she had remained excluded from our gatherings due to concerns about her age and mobility. David's children were connecting with cousins they had never met, creating relationships that could continue long beyond this single event. The investment in bringing his family from Denver was already paying dividends in terms of relationship, building that would strengthen family bonds for years to come. Their excitement about discovering extended family demonstrated how much connection had been lost through years of exclusions based on geographic distance. The activity stations were creating natural mixing opportunities that brought together family members who might not have interacted otherwise. The fishing tournament included participants ranging from 8 to 83 years old, with experienced anglers teaching novices and competitive elements that engaged everyone regardless of their skill level. Craft stations were producing personalized mementos that would serve as lasting reminders of the gathering while providing creative outlets for family members who might not enjoy more active pursuits. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself reflecting on the dramatic difference between this gathering and previous family reunions. The expanded space, enhanced amenities, and professional coordination had eliminated many of the minor frustrations and logistical challenges that often created stress at family events. Instead of crowded conditions and limited facilities, we had abundant space and premium services that allowed everyone to focus on connection and enjoyment rather than practical concerns. But the most significant difference wasn't logistical. It was philosophical. This reunion was built on the principle of inclusion rather than exclusion, with resources applied to bring people together rather than finding reasons to leave them out. The result was a gathering that honored the full diversity of our family while creating shared experiences that would strengthen bonds across generations and geographic distances. The success of the event was evident in the energy and engagement of family members who were clearly having experiences they would remember for years to come. Children were forming friendships with cousins they had just met. Adults were renewing relationships that had lapsed due to time and distance. And elderly relatives were sharing wisdom and stories that enriched everyone's understanding of our shared heritage. As the sun began to move lower in the sky, signaling the approach of evening activities, I realized that the reunion had already exceeded my most optimistic expectations. The investment in creating this experience had been justified by the joy and connection I was witnessing. But more importantly, it had demonstrated values and priorities that would influence how our family approached future gatherings and relationships. The foundation had been laid for a different kind of Thompson family culture, one that prioritized inclusion over exclusion and applied resources to strengthen relationships rather than finding reasons to limit them. Whether this cultural shift would persist beyond this single event remained to be seen, but the precedent had been established, and the possibilities had been demonstrated in ways that couldn't be ignored or forgotten. The pivotal moment arrived at exactly 10:15 in the morning, an hour and 15 minutes after the reunion had officially begun. I was standing near the photography station, watching Great-Aunt Marjorie share stories with a circle of fascinated grandchildren, when I spotted the distinctive outline of Brittany's burgundy minivan pulling into the parking lot. Through the trees, I could see her come to a complete stop, clearly trying to process what she was witnessing. The parking lot that should have contained perhaps 20 vehicles from their anticipated 60-person gathering instead held over 40 cars, many with out-of-state license plates that immediately signaled the presence of family members who weren't supposed to be there. Expensive rental cars sat alongside modest family sedans and Uncle Frank's commercial plumbing truck, creating a visual representation of our family's diversity that had never been so apparent at previous gatherings. Brittany sat in her vehicle for nearly 3 minutes, and I could see her making phone calls, presumably trying to reach Kevin or my parents to understand what was happening. Her body language conveyed confusion that was rapidly shifting towards something that might have been panic as she processed the implications of what she was seeing. This wasn't the modest family picnic she had carefully orchestrated, and the loss of control was clearly affecting her ability to respond. Kevin's silver BMW arrived next, followed immediately by a convoy of 3 additional vehicles carrying the core group of family members who had been included in Brittany's original planning. They formed a cluster in the parking area, clearly engaged in urgent conversation as they tried to understand how their carefully planned event had been transformed into something completely different. My parents emerged from their sedan looking overwhelmed by the scale and elegance of what they were witnessing. Dad stood with his hands on his hips, a posture I recognized from childhood as his way of processing situations that exceeded his expectations. Mom clutched her purse and looked around with an expression that mixed amazement with something that might have been concern about the financial implications of what she was seeing. I watched this huddle of confusion from my position, near the main pavilion, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and nervousness about the confrontation that was about to unfold. The planning phase had been exciting and empowering, but this moment would reveal whether my family was capable of appreciating the gesture I had made, or would instead react defensively to having their assumptions and control challenged so dramatically. The cluster of original invitees spent several more minutes in urgent discussion before beginning their approach toward the main gathering area. Brittany led the group, her usual confidence replaced by visible uncertainty as she navigated through a celebration that bore no resemblance to anything she had planned or anticipated. Kevin walked beside her, his accountant's mind clearly working to calculate the costs involved in creating what they were experiencing. As they approached the main pavilion area, their arrival created a noticeable shift in the dynamics of the reunion. Family members who had been engaged in conversations and activities turned to observe the interaction that was about to unfold, sensing that something significant was happening beyond the normal social dynamics of family gatherings. The acoustic trio continued playing, but several family members moved closer to witness whatever was about to occur. I positioned myself where the arriving group would naturally encounter me, near the welcome area that Amanda's team had established, with elegant signage and information about the day's activities. The moment felt like the culmination of weeks of planning and years of frustration, but I was determined to handle it with grace and composure rather than allowing emotion to undermine the statement I was trying to make. Brittany reached me first, her face reflecting a complex mixture of emotions that she was clearly struggling to organize into coherent response. Behind her, Kevin and my parents approached more slowly, still processing the scale and implications of what they were witnessing. The usual family dynamic where Brittany took charge and others followed her lead seemed suspended, as everyone grappled with circumstances that exceeded their experience or expectations. "Jessica," Brittany began, her voice carrying uncertainty. That was completely uncharacteristic for someone who typically approached every situation with unwavering confidence. "What is all of this? I mean, it's beautiful, but I don't understand what's happening here." Her question provided me with the perfect opening to address the situation directly while maintaining the composed demeanor I had planned to project throughout this confrontation. I smiled warmly, as though her confusion was perfectly understandable, and her arrival was simply another pleasant addition to an already successful celebration. "This is the Thompson family reunion," I replied simply, gesturing toward the gathering of nearly 90 family members who were clearly enjoying the premium amenities and expanded social opportunities. "I know you had concerns about space limitations, so I thought I would solve that problem by ensuring we had plenty of room for everyone who wanted to attend." The simplicity of my explanation seemed to increase rather than reduce Brittany's confusion, as though she had expected a more complex justification for what she was witnessing. Kevin stepped forward, his face reflecting the kind of analytical thinking that had made him successful in his accounting career, but was clearly struggling to process the personal and financial implications of this situation. "Jessica, you booked the entire park?" he asked, his tone mixing disbelief with what might have been grudging admiration for the scale of what I had accomplished. "How is that even possible? And how many people are here?" The questions revealed how completely my family had underestimated both my capabilities and my commitment to family connection. Kevin's surprise at the possibility of booking the entire park demonstrated how little he understood about my resources and professional experience with large-scale event coordination. His amazement that I could organize something of this magnitude revealed assumptions about my competence that were as insulting as they were inaccurate. I worked with Riverside Entertainment Group to arrange exclusive access to the facility, I explained, maintaining the same matter-of-fact tone I might use to describe routine business arrangements. We have 87 confirmed family members attending today, including several relatives who haven't been able to join our gatherings in recent years due to various logistical challenges. The number clearly shocked everyone in the arriving group, as their mental calculations revealed that I had more than doubled the size of the gathering they had planned. But more significantly, the reference to relatives who had been excluded from recent events introduced an uncomfortable element that challenged the narrative they had constructed about necessary limitations and practical constraints. My mother was the first to find her voice, though it carried a tremor that suggested she was still processing the implications of what she was witnessing. "Honey, this is absolutely incredible, but I'm concerned about the expense. How much did something like this cost? You shouldn't have spent your money on something so elaborate just because we had a misunderstanding about the planning." Her characterization of my exclusion as a misunderstanding rather than a deliberate choice revealed how completely my family had convinced themselves that their decision-making process had been reasonable and considerate. The suggestion that I had overspent due to emotional reaction rather than careful planning demonstrated their continued inability to recognize my professional capabilities or financial resources. "The investment was significant but manageable," I replied, choosing language that acknowledged the cost without providing specific figures that might derail the conversation into financial analysis rather than addressing the underlying issues of inclusion and family values. I felt it was important to create an opportunity for our entire extended family to reconnect, especially relatives who haven't been able to participate in recent gatherings. Dad stepped forward, his expression reflecting the kind of practical thinking that had guided his approach to family finances throughout my childhood. "Jessica, we appreciate the gesture, but this seems excessive. We could have worked out the space issue without going to these extremes. Maybe we could have found a larger pavilion or adjusted the guest list to accommodate everyone." His suggestion? That accommodation could have been easily achieved through simple adjustments, revealed how little thought had actually been given to including me in their original planning. The implication that solutions had been available but unexplored demonstrated that my exclusion had been accepted as inevitable rather than challenged as unnecessary. Before I could respond to Dad's comments, Great Aunt Marjorie's voice carried across the gathering area as she called out to my mother, "Helen! Oh my goodness, it's so wonderful to see you. Jessica, bless her heart, arranged everything so I could be here today. Isn't this just the most beautiful celebration you've ever seen?" The joy in Marjorie's voice and her obvious gratitude for being included created an immediate shift in the emotional dynamics of our conversation. Here was a family member who had been excluded from recent gatherings due to assumptions about her age and mobility, yet her presence was clearly enriching the event for everyone who had the opportunity to connect with her. Mom's face softened as she saw Marjorie approaching with the assistance of her nurse, and I could see the recognition dawning that this reunion was providing opportunities for connection that wouldn't have existed under the original space-limited plan. The presence of elderly relatives who had been deemed too challenging to include was forcing everyone to confront the real consequences of their exclusionary decision-making. Cousin David spotted Kevin and approached with his 3 children in tow, their faces still glowing with excitement from their morning activities. "Kevin! Man, it's been way too long. I can't believe Jessica made it possible for us to be here. The kids have been having the time of their lives meeting all their cousins." David's enthusiastic greeting and obvious gratitude created another uncomfortable moment for the original planning group, as they were forced to acknowledge that family members they had written off as too distant or difficult to include were clearly valued participants whose presence was enhancing the gathering for everyone involved. Kevin's response revealed his growing understanding of the situation's complexity. "It's great to see you too, David. I had no idea Jessica had arranged for so many family members to attend. This is definitely bigger than anything we've done before. The acknowledgement contained an implicit recognition that the original planning had been unnecessarily restrictive, but it also carried undertones of concern about the precedent being set and the implications for future family gatherings. Kevin's accounting background made him acutely aware of the financial investment required to create this experience, and I could see him calculating the long-term sustainability of this approach to family celebration. Brittany had remained unusually quiet during these exchanges, her typical take-charge demeanor replaced by obvious uncertainty about how to respond to circumstances that were completely outside her experience or control. The woman who had confidently excluded me from family planning was now confronted with evidence that her decision-making had been both unnecessarily restrictive and potentially harmful to family relationships. "Jessica," she said finally, her voice carrying a vulnerability I had rarely heard from her before. "I need to apologize. When I said there wasn't enough space, I was trying to manage logistics and keep costs reasonable. But I realize now that I made the wrong choice. You should have been included from the beginning, and I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't welcome." Her apology was more direct and heartfelt than I had expected, revealing that the impact of witnessing the expanded reunion was forcing her to confront the limitations of her previous thinking. But even as I appreciated her willingness to acknowledge the mistake, I could see that she was still framing the issue in terms of logistics and costs, rather than recognizing the deeper pattern of exclusion that had been affecting multiple family members over several years. "I appreciate your apology, Brittany," I replied carefully. "But I think it's important to understand that this wasn't just about space limitations or cost management. The decision to exclude me was part of a larger pattern of assumptions about who belongs in our family gatherings and who can be left out without consequence." My response introduced a level of directness that clearly made everyone uncomfortable, as it challenged them to examine their decision-making process more deeply than they had anticipated. The suggestion that there had been a pattern of exclusionary thinking forced them to consider whether other family members had been similarly affected by their approach to event planning. Uncle Frank approached our group during this conversation, having overheard enough to understand that some kind of family discussion was taking place. His presence added another layer of complexity to the situation, as he represented yet another family member who had been excluded from recent gatherings due to work obligations that could have been accommodated with modest planning and financial investment. "Jessica, I wanted to thank you for arranging coverage for my weekend emergency calls," he said, his gratitude evident in both his tone and expression. "I haven't been able to attend a family gathering in 3 years because of work conflicts, but you made it possible for me to be here without losing income or disappointing my customers." Frank's thanks created another uncomfortable moment for the original planning group, as they were forced to acknowledge that solutions had been available for including family members they had written off as too complicated to accommodate. The pattern of exclusion was becoming increasingly visible as more family members shared their gratitude for being included in ways that previous gatherings had not attempted. The acoustic trio concluded their current set and announced a short break, creating a natural pause in the conversation that allowed everyone to process what had been discussed so far. The temporary quiet was filled with the sounds of family members enjoying activities throughout the park, providing a backdrop of joy and connection that contrasted sharply with the tension of our immediate discussion. Mom looked around at the gathering, her expression reflecting a growing understanding of what I had created and why it mattered. "Honey, I'm beginning to realize that we've been making assumptions about people's ability to attend and their desire to be included. Seeing everyone here today, seeing how happy they are to be together, makes me understand that we've been thinking too small about what our family gatherings could be." Her admission represented a significant shift in perspective, acknowledging that the limitations they had accepted as inevitable were actually choices that had prevented family connection rather than practical constraints that couldn't be overcome. The recognition that they had been thinking too small suggested an openness to reconsidering their approach to family planning, that gave me hope for future gatherings. Dad nodded in agreement, his practical nature leading him to focus on the logistics of what I had accomplished. Jessica, how did you coordinate all of this? The travel arrangements, the catering, the activities? This is more complex than anything I've ever seen you organize. His question revealed how little my family understood about my professional capabilities and experience with large-scale project management. The assumption that this event exceeded my organizational abilities demonstrated their continued inability to recognize the skills and resources I had developed through my business career. This is what I do professionally, I explained, maintaining patience despite the frustration I felt at having to justify my competence to my own family. I coordinate complex projects for Fortune 500 companies, managing budgets and timelines that are significantly larger than what was required for this reunion. The skills transfer quite naturally from corporate event planning to family celebration coordination. My explanation created visible surprise among the group as they began to understand that their assumptions about my professional capabilities had been as inaccurate as their assumptions about my family priorities. The revelation that I regularly managed projects of this scale and complexity challenged their narrative about my career being somehow less substantial or impressive than more traditional professional paths. Kevin's expression reflected growing recognition of the situation's implications. Jessica, I think we've been underestimating both your business success and your commitment to family. This gathering is incredible, and it's clear that you've put enormous thought and resources into bringing everyone together. His acknowledgement felt like a breakthrough in family understanding, recognizing both my professional accomplishments and my genuine desire for family connection. But even as I appreciated his recognition, I could see that the conversation was still focused on this single event, rather than addressing the broader patterns of exclusion and assumption that had created the need for such a dramatic gesture. The photography team approached our group during this conversation, asking if we would like to participate in some family portraits that were being taken throughout the day. The request provided a natural transition away from the intense discussion we had been having, while also offering an opportunity to capture the moment when family dynamics were beginning to shift. As we positioned ourselves for photographs, I noticed how the professional quality of the documentation was creating a different kind of family memory than we had ever preserved before. Instead of casual snapshots taken with phones, these would be professionally composed images that honored both individual personalities and group relationships in ways that reflected the elevated nature of the gathering. The photographer's skill in working with large family groups was evident as she coordinated poses that felt natural rather than forced, capturing genuine expressions of joy and connection rather than the stiff formality that often characterized family photos. The resulting images would serve as lasting documentation of the day when our family's approach to gathering and inclusion had fundamentally changed. During the photography session, I observed how family members who had been excluded from recent gatherings were now being included in formal family portraits that would become part of our permanent family history. Great Aunt Marjorie's presence in these images ensured that her wisdom and memories would be preserved alongside the younger generations, while David's family would finally have visual documentation of their connection to the broader Thompson family network. The session concluded with a large group photograph that included all 87 family members who were attending the reunion. The logistics of coordinating such a large group required professional expertise, but the resulting image would serve as powerful evidence of what became possible when resources were applied to inclusion rather than exclusion. As we returned to the main gathering area, I noticed that the original planning group had begun to integrate more naturally with the broader celebration. Brittany was engaged in conversation with relatives she hadn't seen in years, while Kevin was participating in the fishing tournament with his children and several cousins. The initial shock of discovering the expanded reunion was giving way to appreciation for the opportunities it was creating. Mom found me as I checked on various activity stations throughout the park. Jessica, I want you to know that this has been eye-opening for me. Seeing everyone together like this, seeing how happy they are to be included, makes me realize how much connection we've been missing by keeping our gatherings small and exclusive. Her reflection indicated that the reunion was achieving one of its primary goals, demonstrating the value of inclusive family planning and the richness that comes from bringing together extended family networks rather than limiting gatherings to core groups. The recognition that connection had been missing from previous events suggested an understanding that could influence future family decision-making. The catering team began serving the main course as family members gathered around tables that had been arranged to encourage intergenerational mixing rather than segregation by age or family unit. The professional quality of the food presentation and service created an atmosphere of celebration that elevated the gathering beyond typical family picnic dynamics, while maintaining the casual warmth that made everyone feel comfortable. As I moved through the gathering, observing conversations and connections that were developing throughout the day, I realized that the reunion had already exceeded my most optimistic expectations. The investment in creating this experience had been justified not just by the immediate joy and connection I was witnessing, but by the demonstration of values and possibilities that could influence how our family approached relationships and gatherings for years to come. The success of the event was evident in details both large and small. Elderly relatives sharing stories with fascinated younger family members, cousins from different states planning future visits, children forming friendships that would continue beyond this single day, and adults reconnecting with relationships that had been weakened by time and distance. Every aspect of the gathering was contributing to the creation of family bonds that would strengthen our network long after the reunion ended. As the afternoon progressed toward evening activities, I found myself reflecting on the transformation that had occurred not just in the park setting, but in family dynamics and understanding. The reunion had become more than a response to exclusion. It had evolved into a demonstration of what became possible when resources were applied thoughtfully to strengthen relationships and create opportunities for connection across generations and geographic distances. The afternoon transformed into evening with a seamless transition that showcased the professional event coordination that had made this gathering so exceptional. String lights began to illuminate the pavilion areas as the sun started its descent toward the Minneapolis skyline, creating an atmosphere that felt both intimate and celebratory. The acoustic trio had expanded their setup to include additional instruments for the evening portion of their performance, preparing to provide a soundtrack for activities that would continue well past typical family reunion hours. Amanda approached me as I stood near the lake area, watching several generations of family members participating in the fishing tournament that had become unexpectedly popular throughout the day. Her professional demeanor carried a warmth that suggested genuine satisfaction with how the event was unfolding, and her attention to detail continued to impress me with its thoroughness and anticipation of needs before they became apparent. "Jessica, everything is proceeding beautifully," she said, consulting the detailed timeline that had guided our coordination throughout the day. "The evening activities are ready to begin whenever you'd like to transition, and I wanted to confirm the timing for the special presentation you had mentioned during our planning sessions." The special presentation she referenced was something I had been contemplating throughout the afternoon as I watched family members connect and reconnect in ways that exceeded even my optimistic expectations. The success of the reunion had created an opportunity to address not just the immediate circumstances that had led to this gathering, but the broader patterns of family communication and decision-making that needed to change if we were going to build on the foundation we had established. "Today, let's begin the transition to evening activities," I replied, feeling a mixture of anticipation and nervousness about the next phase of the day. "I'd like to address the family before we begin the final activities, if that works with the overall schedule." Amanda nodded and began coordinating with her team to make the necessary arrangements. Within minutes, a gentle announcement was made that invited all family members to gather in the main pavilion area for a brief program before evening activities began. The professional quality of this coordination ensured that the transition felt natural rather than disruptive, maintaining the celebratory atmosphere while creating space for more formal acknowledgments and reflections. As family members moved toward the pavilion, I noticed the diversity of conversations and connections that had developed throughout the day. Great Aunt Marjorie was being escorted by several grandchildren who had spent the afternoon listening to her stories and learning about family history they had never heard before. David's family was walking with cousins they had just met, making plans for future visits that would continue relationships beyond this single gathering. Uncle Frank was engaged in animated conversation with Kevin about business strategies and professional networking, a discussion that revealed how little the two men had known about each other's expertise and experience, despite being related for over 2 decades. The expansion of the guest list had created opportunities for discovery and connection that wouldn't have been possible under the original space-limited approach to family gathering. The seating arrangement in the main pavilion had been designed to encourage continued intergenerational mixing, with tables and chairs positioned to facilitate conversation while ensuring that everyone would have clear sightlines for whatever presentation might occur. The professional lighting and sound equipment ensured that even family members with hearing difficulties would be able to participate fully in whatever program was about to unfold. I stepped onto the small platform that Amanda's team had established for speakers and musicians, feeling the weight of 87 pairs of eyes focused on me with attention that mixed curiosity, gratitude, and in some cases, lingering confusion about how this extraordinary day had come to pass. The moment felt like a culmination of not just the planning and execution of this event, but of years of family dynamics that had led to this point of transformation. I want to thank everyone for being here today, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the professional sound system to every corner of the pavilion. For some of you, this is the first Thompson family reunion you've attended in many years. For others, it's your first reunion ever. But all of you belong here, because that's what family means. It includes everyone, not just some of us. The opening words established the theme that had guided my planning and would continue to influence my remarks. The importance of inclusion over exclusion and the responsibility we all shared for creating family culture that honored every member, rather than limiting participation based on arbitrary constraints or assumptions about who mattered most. A gentle murmur moved through the gathering as family members processed the implication that previous reunions had been unnecessarily exclusive, and I could see recognition dawning on faces throughout the crowd as they realized that many of the relatives they were meeting for the first time had been systematically excluded from family gatherings for reasons that now seemed insufficient or misguided. This year, I was told that space was limited, and tough decisions had to be made about who could attend our family reunion. I continued, maintaining a tone that was direct but not accusatory, focusing on the situation rather than personalizing the critique. I was told that there wasn't room for everyone, and that some family members were more essential than others. The reference to my own exclusion created visible discomfort among the family members who had been involved in the original planning, but it also provided context for the dramatic response they were witnessing. The explanation helped everyone understand that this elaborate gathering wasn't simply an expression of generosity, but a direct response to exclusionary decision-making that had affected not just me, but multiple family members over several years. But I've learned something in my professional career that applies to family relationships as well, I said, gesturing toward the transformed park setting that surrounded us. When you think you don't have enough resources to include everyone, sometimes the problem isn't insufficient resources. It's insufficient creativity and commitment to finding solutions that work for everyone. This observation challenged the fundamental assumptions that had guided family planning for years, suggesting that the limitations that had been accepted as inevitable were actually choices that reflected priorities and values, rather than immutable constraints. The implication that solutions had been available but unexplored created an uncomfortable recognition that exclusion had been chosen rather than necessary. Today, we have room for everyone, I continued, looking out at the diverse gathering that included family members from 4 generations and multiple states. Great Aunt Marjorie, who some people thought might be too frail to include. Cousin David's family, who lived too far away to matter. Uncle Frank, who works weekends. Everyone who didn't fit into someone else's idea of who deserved to be here. The specific examples of inclusion highlighted how many family members had been affected by exclusionary thinking, and I could see recognition on faces throughout the crowd as relatives realized that people they were enjoying meeting today had been systematically left out of previous gatherings for reasons that now seemed arbitrary and hurtful. The acoustic trio provided gentle background music that enhanced rather than competed with my words, creating an atmosphere that felt both intimate and ceremonial. The professional lighting had been adjusted to ensure that my presentation felt like a natural part of the day's programming rather than an interruption of the celebration. "I'm Jessica Thompson," I said, transitioning to information that some family members were learning for the first time despite our being related for decades. "I founded and operate a technology consulting firm that employs 42 people across offices in Chicago, Minneapolis, and Denver. We serve Fortune 500 clients and generate annual revenue that allows me to do things like arrange today's gathering." The professional information created visible surprise among family members who had never understood the scale or nature of my business success. The revelation that my company had an office in Minneapolis, less than an hour from where most of them lived, highlighted how little they knew about my professional activities despite my regular attendance at family gatherings. Last year, our firm was recognized by Incubator magazine as one of the fastest-growing consulting companies in the Midwest, I added, providing specific achievements that contradicted years of family assumptions about my career being somehow less substantial or impressive than more traditional professional paths. "We've been profitable every quarter for the past 4 years, and we're expanding internationally next year." The business accomplishments I was sharing weren't meant to boast or make anyone feel uncomfortable, but rather to establish credibility and context for the resources and capabilities that had made today's event possible. The information also challenged family narratives about my priorities and commitments, demonstrating that professional success and family devotion weren't mutually exclusive. "But I'm also the family member who apparently doesn't need family connection the way others do," I said, introducing a note of vulnerability that balanced the professional accomplishments with personal truth. "The one who's too busy, too different, too independent to really care about being included in family gatherings." This characterization of family perceptions created uncomfortable recognition among relatives who had contributed to or accepted this narrative about my character and priorities. The juxtaposition of my demonstrated family commitment through today's event with their assumptions about my indifference highlighted the disconnect between their perceptions and my actual feelings and behaviors. "I want you to understand something important," I continued, my voice carrying quiet intensity that commanded complete attention from the gathered family members. "I have never missed a Thompson family reunion. I have never been too busy for family. I have simply been waiting for family to not be too busy for me." The statement landed with emotional weight that rippled through the gathering, creating moments of recognition and discomfort as family members processed the implications of what I was saying. The suggestion that they had been too busy for me, rather than the reverse, challenged fundamental assumptions about family dynamics and forced everyone to reconsider their understanding of past interactions and decisions. Several family members were visibly emotional as they processed the gap between their assumptions and my expressed feelings, and I could see tears in eyes throughout the crowd as relatives realized how their decision-making had affected someone they cared about but had consistently misunderstood. "This reunion isn't about proving anything or making anyone feel guilty," I said, softening my tone to ensure that the message remained constructive rather than punitive. "It's about demonstrating what becomes possible when we choose inclusion over exclusion, when we apply resources to bring people together rather than finding reasons to leave them out." The emphasis on positive possibilities rather than past mistakes helped maintain the celebratory atmosphere while still addressing the serious issues that had created the need for this dramatic response. The focus on future potential rather than historical grievances provided a foundation for building better family relationships rather than dwelling on previous failures. Today, 87 Thompson family members are connecting across 4 generations and multiple states, I said, gesturing toward the gathering that represented the largest family reunion in our history. Children are meeting cousins they never knew existed. Adults are renewing relationships that had been interrupted by distance and time. Elderly relatives are sharing wisdom and stories that enrich everyone's understanding of our heritage. The specific examples of connection and growth that had occurred throughout the day provided concrete evidence of what inclusive family planning could accomplish, demonstrating that the investment in bringing everyone together had produced tangible benefits that extended far beyond the immediate celebration. The cost of creating today's experience was significant, I acknowledged, addressing the elephant in the room that I knew was concerning some family members. But the cost of continuing to exclude family members from our gatherings would have been far greater, measured in lost relationships, missed connections, and the gradual erosion of bonds that hold families together across generations. This framing positioned the financial investment as preventive rather than excessive, suggesting that the alternative of continued exclusion would have produced costs that were ultimately more damaging than the monetary expense of creating inclusive experiences. Great Aunt Marjorie raised her hand from her seat in the front row, her gesture creating a moment of gentle humor that lightened the emotional intensity of the presentation. "May I say something, dear?" she asked, her voice carrying the authority that comes with being the eldest family member present. "Of course," I replied, stepping back to give her space to speak while the sound system was adjusted to ensure everyone could hear her comments. "I've been attending Thompson family gatherings for over 70 years, she began, her voice stronger than her 93 years might have suggested. "I've seen this family grow and change in wonderful ways, but I've also watched as we've become smaller in our thinking about who belongs and who matters." Her perspective carried weight that exceeded anything I could have said, providing historical context that highlighted how family culture had evolved in directions that weren't necessarily positive or inevitable. What Jessica has created today reminds me of the gatherings we used to have when I was young, when the idea of leaving family members out seemed unthinkable, she continued, her words creating visible recognition among older family members who remembered more inclusive approaches to family celebration. "This is what family should look like," she concluded, gesturing toward the diverse gathering of relatives who represented the full spectrum of Thompson family connections. Everyone together, everyone valued, everyone contributing to the love and support that makes families strong. Her endorsement provided validation that extended beyond my personal perspective, establishing that the inclusive approach I had demonstrated aligned with historical family values rather than representing some radical departure from tradition. The spontaneous applause that followed Marjorie's comments created a moment of emotional release that had been building throughout my presentation. Family members were responding not just to her words, but to the recognition that they were participating in something that honored both family history and future possibilities. As the applause subsided, I returned to the microphone for final comments that would transition the gathering toward evening activities while consolidating the themes that had emerged throughout the day. "Tomorrow, most of you will return to your homes and regular routines," I said, acknowledging the temporary nature of our gathering while emphasizing its lasting significance. "But I hope you'll remember that family doesn't have to be limited by space constraints or budget concerns or assumptions about who really wants to be included." The message emphasized personal responsibility for maintaining the inclusive spirit that had been demonstrated today, encouraging family members to carry these values into future interactions and decision-making processes. Family means making room for everyone, not finding reasons to leave people out. I concluded, returning to the central theme that had guided both my planning and my presentation. It means applying creativity and resources to solve problems rather than accepting limitations as inevitable. The final words provided a framework for future family planning that could influence relationships and gatherings for years to come, establishing principles that transcended this single event while honoring the foundation we had built together. As I stepped down from the platform, the gathering erupted in sustained applause that felt different from polite family appreciation. This was recognition for something significant that had been accomplished, acknowledgement of values that had been demonstrated, and gratitude for an experience that had exceeded everyone's expectations while providing a new model for what family celebration could become. The evening activities that followed would continue until well past typical family reunion hours, with professional entertainment, premium dining, and opportunities for connection that extended the day's impact far beyond what anyone had anticipated. But the foundation had been established, the message had been delivered, and the Thompson family reunion would never be the same again. The weeks following the reunion brought a cascade of changes that rippled through our family in ways I had never anticipated. Phone calls came daily from relatives who wanted to express gratitude, share reflections about the experience, or simply maintain connections that had been rekindled during our extraordinary gathering. Great Aunt Marjorie called twice in the first week, each time sharing additional family stories that the reunion had brought to mind and expressing her joy at feeling truly included in family activities for the first time in years. David's family sent a package from Denver containing handwritten thank you notes from each of his children, along with photographs they had taken during their visit to Minneapolis. The notes revealed how much the reunion had meant to young people who had grown up feeling disconnected from their extended family network. His oldest daughter wrote about finally understanding where she came from and feeling proud to be part of something larger than her immediate family unit. But perhaps the most significant change occurred within the core group that had originally planned the modest gathering I had transformed so dramatically. Brittany reached out 3 days after the reunion, requesting a private lunch meeting to discuss what she called a fundamental shift in how I think about family planning. Her tone over the phone carried none of the confident authority that had characterized our previous interactions about family events. We met at a quiet restaurant in downtown Minneapolis, and I could see immediately that the reunion had affected her profoundly. She looked tired but thoughtful, as though she had spent considerable time processing experiences that challenged long-held assumptions about leadership and inclusion. Her usual polished appearance remained intact, but something deeper had shifted in her demeanor. "Jessica, I need to start by acknowledging something that's been bothering me since the reunion," she began, her voice carrying vulnerability I had rarely heard from her before. "I've been thinking about all the family members I've excluded from gatherings over the years, and I'm realizing that I've been making decisions based on my own comfort and convenience rather than what's best for our family as a whole." Her admission represented a level of self-reflection that surprised me with its depth and honesty. Brittany had always positioned herself as the responsible organizer who made difficult but necessary decisions for the good of the family. But she was now questioning the fundamental assumptions that had guided her approach to event planning and relationship management. "I've been telling myself that I was being practical and realistic about space and budget constraints," she continued, stirring her coffee with nervous energy that contrasted sharply with her usual composed demeanor. "But watching everyone together, at your reunion, seeing how happy people were to be included, made me realize that I've been prioritizing logistics over relationships." The recognition that logistics had been prioritized over relationships captured exactly what had been problematic about the family's approach to gathering and inclusion. Her willingness to acknowledge this imbalance suggested a genuine understanding of why changes needed to be made and how family decisions were approached in the future. "The most painful part," she admitted, her eyes filling with tears that she tried to control, "was realizing that I excluded you not because space was actually limited, but because I had convinced myself that you wouldn't really want to be there. Anyway, I used assumptions about your priorities to justify a decision that was really about my own anxiety about managing a larger, more complex event. Her honesty about the motivations behind my exclusion provided the kind of direct acknowledgement I had hoped for but hadn't expected to receive. The admission that assumptions about my desires had been used to rationalize exclusionary decision-making revealed how family narratives could become self-serving justifications for choices that were actually about comfort and control rather than practical necessity. "I want to learn how to do better," she said, looking directly at me with an expression that mixed determination with uncertainty. "I want to understand how you organized something so complex and beautiful, and I want to apply those skills to creating inclusive family experiences rather than exclusive ones." Her request for guidance represented a complete reversal of our previous dynamic, where she had positioned herself as the family expert on event coordination while treating my professional capabilities as irrelevant to family planning. The recognition that she could learn from my approach suggested a fundamental shift in how she viewed both my competence and the possibilities for family gathering. Kevin reached out later that same week, but his approach was characteristically different from Brittany's emotional processing. He requested a meeting at his office, where he presented a detailed analysis of the reunion's costs and impact that reflected his accountant's mindset, but also revealed genuine appreciation for what had been accomplished. "I've been calculating the per-person cost of your reunion compared to our typical gatherings," he began, spreading spreadsheets across his desk with the kind of systematic approach that had made him successful in his profession. Initially, the numbers seemed overwhelming, but when I factored in the expanded guest list and the quality of experience you created, the investment actually makes financial sense. His analysis provided validation from an unexpected source, as Kevin's business background gave him credibility on financial matters that family members respected and trusted. His conclusion that the investment had been reasonable rather than excessive could influence how other relatives viewed both the reunion itself and the potential for similar events in the future. But more importantly, he continued, his tone shifting from analytical to personal. "I've been thinking about the business principles you applied to family planning, and I'm realizing that I could learn something from your approach to resource allocation and outcome measurement." The recognition that business principles could enhance family relationships represented a significant evolution in Kevin's thinking, as he had previously viewed professional skills and family dynamics as separate domains that didn't inform each other. His interest in learning from my approach suggested opportunities for collaboration that could strengthen both our relationship and our family's approach to future gatherings. "I'd like to propose something," he said, pulling out a formal document that immediately reminded me of the business partnerships he managed in his professional life. "What if we established a Thompson Family Foundation that could provide sustainable funding for inclusive family gatherings? I've drafted some preliminary numbers based on contributions from family members who have the resources to support enhanced events." His proposal represented exactly the kind of systematic thinking that could transform occasional grand gestures into sustainable family culture change. The foundation concept would distribute both financial responsibility and decision-making authority, ensuring that future gatherings could maintain high standards of inclusion without relying on single individuals to absorb overwhelming costs. My parents' response evolved more gradually, reflecting their generation's tendency to process major changes through extended conversation and reflection rather than immediate action. Mom called several times during the weeks following the reunion, each conversation revealing new layers of understanding about what the event had meant and what it suggested about family relationships going forward. "I keep thinking about Great Aunt Marjorie's face when she saw everyone together," Mom said during one of these calls, her voice carrying emotion that suggested the image had stayed with her since the reunion. "She looked so happy, so alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. It made me realize how much we've been missing by keeping our gatherings small and predictable." Her focus on Marjorie's joy provided a concrete example of why inclusion mattered. moving beyond abstract principles to specific human impact that was impossible to dismiss or rationalize away. The recognition that family vitality had been missing from previous gatherings suggested an understanding that could influence future decision-making in positive directions. "Your father and I have been talking about how we can do better going forward," she continued, introducing collaborative thinking that hadn't characterized their previous approach to family planning. "We want to make sure that future gatherings build on what you created rather than sliding back into old patterns of exclusion and assumption." The commitment to building on positive changes rather than reverting to familiar patterns represented exactly the kind of cultural shift I had hoped the reunion might inspire. Their willingness to take active responsibility for maintaining inclusive approaches suggested that the impact of the event might extend far beyond the immediate experience. But the most profound conversations occurred with family members who had been excluded from previous gatherings and were still processing the emotional impact of finally being included in a significant family celebration. Uncle Frank called to share how the reunion had affected his relationship with his teenage son, who had never understood the importance of extended family connections until witnessing the multi-generational celebration I had created. "My boy spent the whole drive home talking about his cousins and asking when we could see them again," Frank said, his pride in his son's enthusiasm evident in every word. "He's never shown interest in family stuff before, but something about that gathering made him understand why these relationships matter." The intergenerational impact Frank described represented one of the most significant outcomes of the reunion, as young people who had grown up feeling disconnected from extended family were now actively seeking opportunities to maintain and develop those relationships. The investment in creating inclusive experiences was paying dividends in ways that would influence family culture for decades to come. Cousin David's follow-up communication came in the form of a detailed email that described how the reunion had inspired his family to reconsider their own approach to maintaining long-distance relationships. He had begun planning regular visits to Minneapolis and investigating opportunities to relocate closer to extended family, decisions that would have seemed impossible before experiencing the depth of connection that was available when resources were applied to bridging geographic distances. "We've been living in isolation without really understanding what we were missing," he wrote, capturing the emotional cost of exclusion that went far beyond the immediate disappointment of missing specific events. "The reunion showed us that family connection is worth whatever effort and expense are required to maintain it." His recognition that connection required investment rather than happening automatically challenged assumptions that had allowed geographic distance to become permanent separation. The willingness to make significant life changes based on renewed family relationships demonstrated the profound impact that inclusive approaches to family gathering could have on individual decisions and priorities. The professional impact of the reunion surprised me with its scope and significance. Word of the event had spread through Minneapolis business networks, leading to inquiries from corporate clients who were interested in applying similar principles to company gatherings and team-building events. The skills I had demonstrated in family event coordination were apparently transferable to business applications in ways I hadn't anticipated. Amanda from Riverside Entertainment Group called to discuss potential partnerships for future events, both family and corporate. "What you created has become something of a legend in our industry," she said, her enthusiasm genuine and professionally focused. "We've had multiple clients ask if we can help them create similar experiences for their own family gatherings and business celebrations." The business opportunities emerging from family event planning represented an unexpected validation of the skills and approaches I had developed through my consulting work. The recognition that family relationship principles could enhance corporate culture and vice versa suggested possibilities for professional growth that aligned perfectly with my values and interests. But beyond the immediate responses and opportunities, the most significant change was internal. The reunion had forced me to confront questions about family belonging and personal worth that had influenced my relationships and self-perception for decades. The success of the event had demonstrated that my desire for family connection was not only legitimate, but shared by many relatives who had been similarly affected by exclusionary family culture. The realization that I wasn't uniquely sensitive or unreasonably demanding in wanting to be included had profound implications for how I understood my place in the family and my responsibility for advocating for inclusive approaches to relationship building. The patterns of exclusion that had affected me were also harming other family members, and addressing these patterns was ultimately about creating healthier family culture rather than seeking personal validation. 6 months after the reunion, our family held its first collaborative planning meeting for future gatherings. Representatives from different family units met at Kevin's office to discuss approaches that would maintain the inclusive spirit and high standards of the park event, while distributing responsibility and costs in sustainable ways. The meeting felt like a board of directors session for Thompson family culture, with formal agendas and systematic decision-making processes that honored both emotional and practical considerations. Brittany had prepared detailed proposals for quarterly family gatherings that would rotate between different cities, ensuring that geographic diversity would be accommodated rather than creating barriers to participation. Kevin presented financial models that showed how modest contributions from family members could fund premium experiences without placing excessive burden on any individual or family unit. Great Aunt Marjorie attended via video conference, her technological adaptation representing another example of how family members were expanding their capabilities to maintain connections that mattered to them. Her historical perspective continued to inform planning decisions, ensuring that new approaches honored family traditions while addressing contemporary needs and opportunities. The collaborative planning process revealed how much family members had learned from the reunion experience about the relationship between resources, creativity, and inclusion. Conversations that might have focused on limitations and constraints now emphasized possibilities and solutions, with family members actively seeking ways to overcome barriers rather than accepting them as inevitable. 1 year after the park reunion, our family gathered again for what had become an annual celebration that maintained the scale and quality of the original event, while incorporating lessons learned about sustainable planning and distributed responsibility. The second reunion included 93 family members, representing continued growth and participation as word spread through extended family networks about the inclusive and celebratory nature of Thompson gatherings. The venue was different, a resort in northern Minnesota that could accommodate overnight stays for out-of-state relatives. But the principles remained consistent. Every family member was invited and accommodated, with financial and logistical barriers addressed through collaborative planning, rather than used as reasons for exclusion. Professional coordination ensured high-quality experiences, while family involvement maintained personal connections and emotional investment. Standing at the edge of the lake where children and adults were enjoying water activities that spanned multiple generations, I reflected on the transformation that had occurred in our family culture over the past year. What had begun as a response to exclusion had evolved into a new model for family relationship building that honored both individual needs and collective values. The reunion had demonstrated that families, like businesses, could grow and improve when resources were applied thoughtfully to address systemic problems rather than accepting limitations as permanent features of relationship dynamics. The investment in inclusion had produced returns that extended far beyond the immediate events, creating ongoing connections and collaborative approaches that strengthened family bonds across geographic distances and generational differences. My phone buzzed with a text message from Brittany, who was coordinating activities on the other side of the resort. "Jessica, thank you for teaching us what family really means. This is what we should have always been doing." Her message captured the essence of what had changed, a shift from accepting exclusion as inevitable to creating inclusion as a conscious choice and ongoing commitment. As the sun set over the Minnesota lake, I realized that the greatest success of the original park reunion hadn't been the immediate joy and connection it created, though that had been profound and meaningful. The greatest success had been demonstrating that family culture could change when someone was willing to invest in different possibilities and model alternative approaches to relationship building. The Thompson family reunions would continue to grow and evolve, but they would never again accept exclusion as necessary or inevitable. We had learned that love, applied with creativity and resources, could overcome almost any barrier to connection. And in learning that lesson, we had become the kind of family that truly honored everyone who belonged to it. The story of the park reunion had become family legend, but more importantly, it had become family culture, and that culture would influence relationships and gatherings for generations to come, ensuring that no Thompson family member would ever again have to buy a park to prove they belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.